What does man's search for meaning actually understand about suffering that ordinary advice misses? The book does not say pain is useful. It does not say attitude fixes everything. It does not say that a person can think their way out of every wound. Viktor Frankl's answer is harder and more careful. Even when life has taken almost every normal source of control, the human being may still be asked for a response that protects dignity. That is why the book has to be read as one movement, not as a few famous lines about purpose. It begins with concentration camp testimony, moves into a psychology of meaning, and ends with the question of whether a person can affirm life without denying pain, guilt, and death. Frankl is not trying to make suffering attractive. He is asking what remains human when suffering cannot be removed. The order matters. Frankl does not begin with a theory about meaning and then hunt for illustrations. He begins with a human being pushed into conditions designed to erase personhood. Only after that witness does he explain logotherapy. The theory, therefore, carries a moral burden. It must not become a slogan. It must remain answerable to the suffering from which it emerged. The reader also needs restraint. This book does not invite easy comparison between ordinary frustration and the camps. Its force comes from the opposite movement. Because the source is extreme, the application must be humble. We do not make our small troubles look larger. We ask whether the same human structure appears in smaller form. A situation narrows control, and the person must decide what response remains worthy. The key viewing promise, then, is not comfort but clarity. A good summary of this book has to keep three things together at the same time: the historical gravity of the memoir, the psychological structure of logotherapy, and the practical question a viewer can carry into life without cheapening the source. If any one of those disappears, the book becomes either only trauma, only theory, or only advice. The memoir begins with the stripping away of identity. The prisoner arrives with a name, profession, possessions, relationships, preferences, plans, and private hopes. The camp attacks all of it. Clothes are removed. Hair is shaved. Privacy disappears. The old social self becomes useless. A number replaces the name. Yesterday's achievements have no bargaining power. A person learns that the world can take away nearly everything by which they use to recognize themselves. Frankl describes this not to create spectacle, but to show the psychological sequence. First comes shock. Then the mind tries to understand the rules of a world that feels unreal. Then ordinary measures of life begin to collapse. Food, warmth, exhaustion, punishment, illness, and fear become immediate realities. The future shrinks. Time changes shape. Human beings are pressured to become only bodies trying to last one more day. Yet Frankl notices that this pressure does not produce one identical response. The camp creates mass conditions, but not one mass soul. One person curses, another comforts. One prisoner becomes cruel in order to survive. Another gives away something small. One guard humiliates. Another offers a tiny mercy. The system is enormous, but the moral unit is still the person. This difference does not make the suffering less real. It makes the remaining freedom more serious. The book is not saying everyone can overcome anything. It is saying that even when circumstance crushes the field of choice almost beyond recognition, the choices that remain can still reveal the person. A small act under extreme pressure may carry the weight of an entire moral world. This early shock also explains why Frankl distrusts easy judgments about human behavior. Under pressure, people can become worse than they imagined or better than anyone expected. The camp does not produce a neat lesson where the good are always strong and the weak always fail. It reveals fragility, cruelty, tenderness, fear, sacrifice, and numbness mixed together. That realism keeps the book from becoming moral theater. Frankl's attention to inner life is one of the reasons the book has survived as more than testimony. The camp tries to make the present total. Hunger says only food matters. Fear says only survival matters. Humiliation says identity is whatever the system declares. But memory, conscience, love, prayer, imagined work, and small acts of restraint keep opening windows beyond the immediate. Those windows do not remove suffering. They do not make the camp bearable in any sentimental sense, but they keep the person from being fully absorbed by the system's description. A remembered face, a fragment of prayer, a future lecture imagined in detail, or a decision not to wound another person becomes a way of saying, "This place is real, but it is not all that is real." This is why the famous last human freedom must be handled carefully. Frankl is not saying prisoners had normal freedom. He is saying that even when external choice is almost destroyed, the stance a person takes toward unavoidable suffering can still carry meaning. That remaining freedom may be small from the outside, but its moral importance is not measured by its size. A useful image is two circles. The outer circle is circumstance, what has happened, what has been taken, what cannot be changed today. The inner circle is response. The next word, the next act, the next refusal to become cruel, the next small fidelity. Frankl does not pretend the inner circle is large. He says it is still the place where dignity can act. The ordinary application is not to pretend every inconvenience is heroic. It is to notice the moment when we surrender the inner circle before the situation has actually taken it. A harsh email, a diagnosis, a debt, a family conflict, a public failure, or a season of grief can make the mind say, "Now my character is decided." Frankl asks for the remaining margin, even if that margin is only one honest sentence. This idea becomes dangerous when readers turn it into blame. Frankl does not say victims cause their suffering. He does not say suffering is good. He does not give outsiders permission to lecture people in pain. He repeatedly shows that many people died despite courage, intelligence, love, hope, and moral seriousness. Meaning does not guarantee rescue. The book's claim is narrower and more humane. If suffering can be removed, treated, resisted, or prevented, then responsibility may require exactly that. Treat the illness if treatment is available. Resist injustice if resistance is possible. Leave danger if leaving is possible. Ask for help if help is needed. Frankl's third road to meaning applies most severely when suffering cannot be eliminated. When a burden cannot be removed, the person may still be asked how to bear witness to a value inside it. Can grief become fidelity rather than only collapse? Can limitation become patience rather than only bitterness? Can fear become courage without pretending fear is pleasant? Can failure become humility and change? These questions do not justify the pain. They refuse to let pain own the whole person. For ordinary life, the practical exercise is simple but demanding. Name what is truly outside your control. Then name the response still possible. Tell the truth, ask for help, protect sleep, keep one appointment, apologize, refuse revenge, continue treatment, do the next hour of work. The second list may look small. That is exactly why it matters. This caution matters because many modern readings of the book turn dignity into pressure. They imply that if you are suffering and not noble about it, you are failing. Frankl's own witness is more compassionate. Fear, exhaustion, collapse, anger, and grief are not automatically moral failures. The question of meaning begins inside human weakness, not after weakness has been conquered. Hope, in Frankl's account, is not cheerful decoration. It is tied to future responsibility. He observes that people could deteriorate when the future closed, when a hoped-for date passed, or when no task, person, or unfinished obligation seem to remain. A vague wish that things improve can collapse. A concrete future call can keep a person oriented. Someone needs me. Something remains unfinished. Some witness must still be given. Frankl's own future orientation appears when he imagines explaining the psychology of the camps after liberation. This is not fantasy in the cheap sense. It is responsibility projected forward. He gives present suffering a possible future task. The pain remains pain, but it may one day become testimony, warning, knowledge, and service. This is one of the book's most useful ideas for non-extreme life, if it is applied with humility. A person under pressure does not always need a perfect 5-year plan. They may need one future point strong enough to keep the future open, a child to care for, a page to finish, a treatment to continue, a conversation to have, a truth to tell, a promise to keep. The future task also changes how a person experiences the present. If the present is only pain, the mind contracts around pain. If the present is connected to a responsibility still waiting, the pain does not disappear, but it is no longer mute. It becomes something that must be carried toward an answer. Future responsibility also explains why meaning is more concrete than optimism. Optimism may say, something good will happen. Meaning says, something good or necessary still asks for me. That difference matters when feelings do not cooperate. A person may not feel hopeful and still have a reason to continue. A child, a patient, a promise, a truth, a work, a prayer, or a witness not yet completed. Love is the other great force in the memoir. Frankl thinks of his wife while marching in terrible conditions, and the memory is not merely sentimental. It becomes a form of presence. Love, for Frankl, is not reduced to possession, usefulness, certainty, or physical closeness. The beloved becomes spiritually real even when the loved person is absent and unreachable. This matters because the camp tries to shrink the prisoner into immediate need. Food, warmth, avoiding punishment, enduring the next hour. Love widens the inner world again. It says there is still someone whose value cannot be reduced to the system, to appetite, or to fear. The body may be trapped in one place, but attention can still turn toward a person whose existence gives life meaning. Frankl's account of love is demanding because it is not only romance. Love is the ability to see another person's essence, possibility, and irreplaceable value. In ordinary life, this means many meaningful acts will look inefficient. Visiting someone, listening patiently, caring for a child, honoring the dead, staying faithful to a family duty, or protecting a fragile relationship may not improve a public metric. But for Frankl, these acts can be central because they answer a human call. Love also protects against the illusion that meaning must be manufactured alone. The beloved calls meaning out of the person. A spouse, child, parent, friend, student, patient, neighbor, or stranger in need can become a living question. The question is not, what mood do I prefer? It is, what does love require now? The book's view of love also refuses reduction. Love is not merely emotional comfort, and it is not merely a tool for endurance. It reveals reality. To love someone is to see that the world contains a value not created by your mood. That is why love can survive uncertainty. Even when Frankl does not know his wife's fate, the act of loving still discloses meaning. From love and future task, Frankl moves to the book's central reversal. We often ask, what do I want from life? Frankl asks, what does life want from me? Meaning is discovered as responsibility. It is not a universal slogan floating above every person. It is the particular task, relationship, truth, burden, or act of love standing before this particular person at this particular moment. That is why Frankl rejects one abstract answer to the meaning of life. Asking for the meaning of life in general is like asking for the one best move in chess without seeing the board. The right move depends on the position. In the same way, meaning depends on the concrete situation, the person involved, the obligations present, and the possibilities still open. This responsibility-centered view keeps meaning from becoming vague spirituality. Meaning is not only a feeling of depth. It often looks like obligation. Someone needs care. A promise needs keeping. A task needs completion. A truth needs telling. A mistake needs repair. A body needs treatment. A family needs honesty. Meaning often arrives not as a mood, but as a demand. That can sound heavy, but it is also freeing. You do not have to solve the meaning of a universe before answering the meaning of Tuesday morning. The concrete situation is enough. The next honest duty is enough to begin. Frankl's view is severe because it refuses drift, but humane because it keeps meaning close to real life. Responsibility also gives the book its ethical seriousness. If life questions us, then meaning is not just something we consume. It is something we answer. A person can read, watch, think, and talk about purpose forever, but meaning becomes real only when some answer is given in conduct. Frankl's question moves the viewer from interpretation to response. Frankl names 3 main roads by which meaning can be found. The first is creating a work or doing a deed. This includes building, serving, teaching, repairing, writing, protecting, or completing something that realizes a value. It does not have to be famous work. The scale is not the point. The question is whether the deed answers a real possibility placed before this person. The second road is experiencing something or encountering someone. This includes love, beauty, nature, art, truth, and the irreplaceable personhood of another human being. A person is not only meaningful when producing. Sometimes meaning comes by receiving reality rightly, seeing beauty, recognizing another person, being opened by truth, or allowing love to make a demand. The third road is the attitude taken toward unavoidable suffering. This is the road most often quoted and most easily misused. Frankl treats it as the highest and hardest possibility, not as an excuse to leave preventable suffering untouched. If suffering is avoidable, the meaningful response may be to remove it. If it cannot be removed, the meaningful response may be to bear witness to a value. The 3 roads prevent a narrow reading of the book. Meaning is not only heroic endurance. It may be creative contribution, loving encounter, or courageous suffering. If one road is blocked, another may still be open. If career collapses, love may remain. If pleasure disappears, duty may remain. If plans fail, an attitude toward the failure may still be possible. The 3 roads are also useful as a diagnostic map. When life feels empty, ask which road is currently neglected. Am I creating or serving anything real? Am I encountering beauty or another person deeply instead of only using them? Am I facing an unavoidable difficulty with a value or only resenting the fact that difficulty exists? The answer can reveal where meaning has gone thin. The second half of the book explains logotherapy, Frankl's meaning-centered approach to psychology. If some traditions emphasize the will to pleasure and others the will to power, Frankl emphasizes the will to meaning. Human beings, in his view, are not satisfied by comfort alone. A life can become easier and still feel empty if it lacks a task worth doing, a person worth loving, or a value worth serving. This is a major correction to the idea that mental health means removing all tension. Frankl argues that a certain kind of tension is healthy, the tension between who a person is and the meaning that asks to be fulfilled. A bow without tension cannot send an arrow. A person without any demanding purpose may not feel peace. They may feel vacancy. The point is not that pressure is always good. Some pressure harms and should be relieved. But the absence of all demand is not the same as meaning. A person may need a worthy demand, a task that pulls them beyond passivity, a relationship that asks for maturity, or a value that requires action. Meaning often gives the soul a direction strong enough to organize effort. This also changes how we think about happiness and success. Frankl warns against pursuing them as direct targets. Happiness often comes as a side effect of meaningful devotion. Success often follows dedication to a cause beyond the self. Chase them directly, and they may become fragile. Serve a real meaning, and they may arrive as byproducts. Healthy tension is easy to misunderstand in a comfort-centered culture. Frankl is not praising burnout, coercion, or endless productivity. He is saying that a person needs a reason to stretch toward something. Too little tension can become emptiness. Too much destructive pressure can crush. The task is not maximum pressure. The task is the right demand, one that calls forth responsibility without destroying the person. Frankl calls one modern problem the existential vacuum. It appears when old instincts no longer tell people exactly what to do, traditions no longer command them completely, and personal meaning has not yet been discovered. The person is free, but the freedom feels empty. Boredom becomes more than boredom. It becomes a sign that life has room for choice, but no chosen direction. This is one reason the book still feels current. A person can be busy and still hollow, connected and still lonely, informed and still directionless. More entertainment may cover the silence for a while, but it does not answer it. More options may increase paralysis. More comfort may make every discomfort feel like failure. More approval may deepen dependence on being seen. People often try to fill the vacuum with conformity or impulse. Conformity says, do what everyone else is doing. Impulse says, do whatever feels good right now. Algorithms, trends, status games, compulsive productivity, and constant distraction can all become ways of avoiding the deeper question. What responsibility is actually mine? Frankl's point is not that pleasure, power, comfort, or success are evil. The point is that they become unstable when treated as life center. Pleasure pursued directly can become compulsive. Power pursued directly can become domination. Comfort pursued directly can make pain intolerable. Meaning orders these goods by asking what they serve. The existential vacuum also helps explain why distraction often fails. Distraction can reduce pain for a moment, and sometimes rest is necessary. But when distraction becomes the main structure of life, the emptiness returns stronger because nothing has been answered. The person has postponed the question, not resolved it. Frankl's language gives dignity to that ache by treating it as a sign that the human being is made for meaning. Logotherapy's practical answer is self-transcendence. The human person becomes fully human not by staring endlessly at the self, but by reaching towards something beyond the self. A person to love, a task to complete, a cause to serve, a value to realize. The self is not destroyed. It is gathered and steadied by devotion to something that is not merely the self. This is one of Frankl's strongest antidotes to anxious self-measurement. A person trying to feel confident may inspect confidence until it disappears. A person trying to feel happy may monitor happiness until life becomes a performance review. A person trying to feel meaningful by checking every inner state may become more trapped in emptiness. Turning outward is not denial of the inner life. It is a healthier relation to it. Ask what the work requires. Ask who needs attention. Ask what value can be served in the next 24 hours. Call the person. Finish the page. Clean the room for someone who needs it. Study the skill. Tell the truth. Schedule the appointment. Meaning often becomes clearer after responsible movement begins. This outward turn also protects against narcissistic versions of self-improvement. The question is not only, how can I become impressive? It is, what am I becoming useful for? Driven toward what, for whom, and at what moral cost? Frankl does not oppose growth. He asks growth to answer to meaning. Self-transcendence also reframes self-care. Caring for the self is not wrong. A person needs sleep, treatment, friendship, food, safety, and limits. But the self becomes unhealthy when it becomes the only object of attention. The point of strengthening the self is not endless self-maintenance. It is the capacity to love, work, serve, endure, repair, and respond with more freedom. 2 logotherapy techniques show how practical Frankl's ideas can become. The first is dereflection. Sometimes a person becomes trapped by excessive self-observation. The more they monitor whether they are calm, confident, happy, asleep, impressive, or normal, the more the desired state retreats. Dereflection shifts attention outward toward a task or person. A speaker who constantly checks whether their hands are shaking may become more nervous. A sleeper who constantly checks whether sleep has arrived may become more awake. A person seeking meaning by staring only at inner states may become more trapped. Dereflection does not mock the fear. It redirects the person toward the world where meaning is waiting to be enacted. The second technique is paradoxical intention. When fear feeds on avoidance, the person may be guided to wish for, exaggerate, or humorously invite the feared symptom in a controlled way. The point is not recklessness. The point is to break the cycle in which fear of fear produces the very reaction the person dreads. Humor creates distance. The person is no longer fully dominated by the symptom. They can see it, speak to it, and discover that it is not the whole self. These techniques matter because they show that logotherapy is not only a philosophy of noble suffering. It is also a therapy of attention, responsibility, distance, and renewed contact with the world. These techniques are not the whole of therapy, and Frankl would be badly used if they replaced medical, trauma-informed, or social support. Their value is more specific. They show that some suffering is intensified by the way attention loops around itself. When a person can step back, use humor, and move toward a task, the symptom may lose part of its command. The book's final movement is tragic optimism, the possibility of saying yes to life despite pain, guilt, and death. The phrase matters because optimism without tragedy becomes denial. Frankl begins with tragedy as tragedy. Pain is painful. Guilt is morally serious. Death is real. Hope that skips those facts becomes shallow. Hope that passes through them can become courage. Pain asks whether suffering can be borne without becoming the whole self. Again, this applies most directly when suffering cannot be removed. The question is not whether pain is pleasant or deserved. It is whether the person can still bear witness to courage, patience, love, or faithfulness without allowing pain to become the final author of identity. Guilt asks a different question. Frankl avoids both denial and permanent shame. Guilt means the wrong mattered, but it also means the person is still responsible. If guilt can become repair, confession, humility, restitution, or change behavior, then even the painful awareness of failure can be drawn into meaning. Death gives the book practical urgency. Because life is finite, choices cannot be postponed forever. A loving word may have a deadline. A task may have a season. A truth may need to be lived before the opportunity passes. Death does not make life meaningless in Frankl's argument. It makes responsibility urgent. The tragic triad also guards against sentimental spirituality. Any philosophy that cannot speak honestly about pain, guilt, and death will eventually fail people. It may sound wise on easy days, but collapses when life becomes serious. Frankl's framework survives because it begins where easy advice usually ends, with the facts that life hurts, humans fail, and time runs out. Tragic optimism refuses two temptations. The first is despair, which says suffering, guilt, and death cancel meaning. The second is shallow positivity, which says meaning requires ignoring suffering, guilt, and death. Frankl takes the harder road. He says meaning is possible despite them, and sometimes through the response they demand. This is why the book's hope is demanding rather than comforting. Frankl does not promise that meaning will make life easy. He does not promise that every wound will be explained. He does not promise that the person who answers bravely will be rewarded with visible success. He promises something narrower and stronger. Tragedy does not automatically erase the possibility of a meaningful response. Tragic optimism also protects against cynicism. Cynicism often presents itself as intelligence. It says hope is naive, ideals are foolish, and responsibility is a trick. Frankl's life makes that posture harder to admire. He saw enough darkness to earn despair, yet he did not make despair his philosophy. His optimism is not innocence. It is a decision to keep meaning visible after innocence has been destroyed. There is also a social challenge here. If human beings need meaning, then communities should not offer only consumption and distraction. Families, schools, workplaces, and cultures should help people find real responsibility. Not everyone needs the same answer, but everyone needs the chance to matter. The social implication is sharp. A culture that offers freedom without responsibility may produce emptiness. A workplace that offers goals without meaning may produce exhaustion. A family that offers comfort without truth may produce avoidance. A school that offers achievement without purpose may produce anxiety. Frankl's question reaches beyond private therapy into the way communities teach people what it means to matter. Seen as a whole, man's search for meaning is not a productivity manual, a happiness formula, or a permission slip to minimize suffering. It is a moral psychology of answerability. The memoir shows meaning under extreme deprivation. Logotherapy explains meaning as a central human need. Tragic optimism argues that pain, guilt, and death do not have final authority to cancel meaning. The final synthesis is simple enough to remember and hard enough to spend a life practicing. Create something. Love someone. Bear the unavoidable with dignity. Repair what guilt reveals. Let mortality make you responsible rather than frantic. Turn outward when the self becomes a prison. When life asks a question you did not choose, answer in a way that protects the human being you still are. The practical question Frankl leaves is not, how do I feel meaningful all the time? It is, what is life asking of me now? In this relationship, this work, this loss, this mistake, this fear, this unfinished task, what response would protect the human being I still am? Where is life asking for work rather than avoidance? Where is love asking for attention rather than mood? Where is guilt asking for repair rather than self-hatred? Where is pain asking for courage without pretending pain is good? Where is death asking you to stop postponing the real thing? Frankl's message is not that life always feels meaningful. It is that life can still hold meaning. A human being may be wounded, frightened, guilty, limited, mortal, and still addressed by responsibility. We become fully human not when life finally gives us everything we want, but when we answer what life is asking of us with as much truth, courage, and love as we can. That final question should be specific enough to disturb the viewer a little. Not what is the meaning of life in general, but what is the meaning of this day? Not what would impress others, but what is actually being asked. Not what mood do I wish I had, but what faithful action is available. The answer may be small, but in Frankl's world, small answers can preserve the soul. This is why the book remains unsettling after the summary ends. It does not let the viewer admire meaning from a distance. It sends a question back into ordinary rooms, ordinary work, ordinary relationships, and ordinary losses, where the next answer has to be lived rather than merely understood. In that sense, the book's deepest challenge is not to find a grand life slogan. It is to become the kind of person who can hear a concrete demand and answer it without waiting for perfect certainty, perfect comfort, or perfect strength. The summary can explain the argument, but only the viewer can test it in the next honest action, with the next person, task, limit, grief, or promise that asks for an answer now in real life.